Former bank robber here. AMA. Aside from your freedom and robbing banks, what's the one thing you missed the most about the outside while you were in the clink? Hugs. I've never been in jail or prison, but I miss these too. Over the course of your entire career, how much did you make? Not very much. Probably like 5 figures. At that point I feel like it's just easier to work for the bank, lol. Methodica. That's called a job. I recognize this. Hilarious. Is there a bond between bank robbers in prison? Like, do you guys swap stories and become friendly because you're in for the same thing? Oddly, yes. I imagine it's no different than people who've played the same sport or can play the same musical instrument. What rules did you have about engagement during robberies? Presence of kids? Violence? No violence. Just walked in and acted as a regular customer. When it was my turn, I handed the teller a note saying to give me their $50s and $100s. I typically clarified that I didn't have a weapon or any intention of hurting them. What movie do you think is a realistic heist movie? I mean, from planning to execution to aftermath. I don't think any of them are very realistic. Hollywood doesn't really do realism all too well. It's like asking which porn is the most realistic. By default, the professional movies are all a bit fantasy. If I had to pick, I'd say Office Space is probably the most realistic. Are there any strange weird moments that stood out to you during your robberies? Like, things you remember but aren't sure why. Maybe the exact outfit a customer was wearing or something. While waiting in line during the first robbery I did, there was a girl standing in front of me. She had a great butt. Somewhere out there is a girl who doesn't know that a bank robber complimented her butt with better social skills. I might have introduced myself to her and skipped the whole robbery altogether even. At what point did you have a thought? I might have ducked up? I've never quite fully felt that way. Frankly. What was the closest call for you, where you actually got away with whatever you were doing? Probably the last one. The lady teller kinda freaked out and started screaming to lock the doors. It was a tad stressful to say the least. But I managed to just turn around and walk out as though nothing were happening. They did lock the doors, but it was just after I'd walked out. I don't think the intent was to trap me there. So it's not like I barely got away in that sense. But it was still way too close for comfort. That was the end of it for me. How did the other prisoners treat you when they heard you are a bank robber? There's a weird level of respect that the guys inside have for bank robbers. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. They're fascinated with it just like anyone else. Crazy story. What was going on in your head when you were robbing banks? Was it a huge adrenaline rush? Were you scared? Nervous? I would like to know what goes on when you commit a crime like that. Thanks. It felt a bit like riding a roller coaster. There's a sense of danger. But ultimately, it was safe enough to check out. It's obviously riskier than riding a roller coaster. But that's the best analogy I can make. It was crazy. And it was scary. But to some, that's what makes life fun. How difficult is it really to rob a bank and get away with it? Who organizes the whole operation? Not very. The only person involved, if they're smart. If I drove say 800 miles away from where I lived to a city 2 states away, and I only robbed one bank, what are the odds I would get caught? I'd rather deal in percentages than odds. Ratios have always bothered me a bit. Officially, I'd estimate a 60% failure rate for the scenario you've described. Don't do it. E1. I like your username. E2. Check the comment chain below for the exact reason I avoid odds. In actuality, I know WTF I'm talking, whether it be odds, fractions, or percentages. I was just making a joke. I get the feeling you want to talk about this. What happened with Amazon? I'm betting he applied, got through the interview process, went for the background check, and the hiring process ended there. But that's just a swag. Pretty much. Got through to orientation and all that stuff. They called a few days before my first day and basically said never mind. The most annoying part was that I spoke openly at every step, from the recruiter to the person who interviewed me and then the person who led orientation, about my criminal history and asked if I was wasting my time. Amazon will still sell my book. I just can't work at the place that ships it to you. What types of prisoners were treated the best and worst by fellow inmates and prison guards? Worst equals 6 offenders. Best equals everybody else. So now that you've been out of incarceration, what are you doing for a job and finding a way to make ends meet? Does being a former convict and listed as a bank robber deter you from certain jobs and all that as well? I worked the first job I could get after first getting out. I worked there, production related work, for just over a year before getting a job in the oil and gas industry. I worked there for a few years and then got out because of an injury. There are definitely certain jobs I can't do these days because of my past. For example, bank teller is probably out of the question. The law doesn't provide for discriminating against ex-cons. But most corporations still do exactly that. For the records, I support a company's right to not hire someone based on their past. I actually wish the laws were a little different there because there's just a shit ton of wasted time going into looking for a job because you think things are fair when they're really not. I'd much rather a company be able to proudly boast, hey I. Keep your former criminal as away from us because I would do exactly that. Look for the former felony-friendly companies instead. Do you think the sentence fitted the crime? No. I think I got less time than I deserved. I'm forever grateful that the judge had something better in mind for me. I've never spoken with him or heard his point of view in detail. But I definitely don't think I got what I deserved. In hindsight, it worked out for the better. Maybe I'm wrong about how many years I deserved or whatever. But I still feel like I got a shit ton of mercy and all of that. Have you ever considered doing a podcast? Especially since your book says you have a lifelong best friend that grew up to be a cop. I can just see the storyline of an ex-bank robber and an ex-cop. Neither of who see eye to eye with societal norms of what they are expected to be like. Being something that people couldn't turn off. Especially if both you guys are funny. Something to think about. I mean, I'd subscribe. Yes. And that friend wants to D. Lol. I just realized who that was. You ducking idiot. What's the biggest thing entertainment gets wrong about bank robbing? How much money you get. I'm not fully read up on your story, but was your history of crime gradual in smaller offenses or did you go directly to the bank robbery? What could those around have done to prevent this path? The worst crime I'd ever committed prior to the bank stuff was probably stealing candy from a store as a child. There was an incident in my mid-20s where I filed a fraudulent police report saying that someone had stolen my identity. But I don't know how illegal it was since I was pretty vague about the whole thing. Good question. I wish I had something more interesting to say about it. What was your favorite bank to rob? Chase. Why? That's not as easy of a question to answer. It's probably just a familiarity thing. I also prefer Chevy to Ford. But that's only because my dad drove Chevy trucks most of my childhood. I was really confused when he got a Ford later in life. I don't really know what to think now. My gut says Chevy, but my brain says it doesn't matter. If anything, Ford should probably be my preference. But who knows? Chase it is. What's something you'd like to share with us that hasn't previously been asked or prompted? Looking for some tidbit of information that you'd really love to share but haven't had the opening for. Marriage is weird. I hate that religion and the law have somehow managed to come together on that one. If you love someone, be with them. If you don't want to be with them anymore, then don't. I don't understand how we got to the point that marriage is such a major thing. Is life possible after prison? Outside of just starting your own business, is there anywhere that is willing to take in a felon at a reasonable pay? What's the best practice for dodging cops and staying low? There are lots of blue collar jobs worth taking. Learning a trade is your best bet though. I think. The best practice for dodging cops is to not try and dodge cops. They're there. And they're not going anywhere. Just keep your nose clean and wear your seatbelt. Hello Clay. I've got a few questions for you. How difficult is it to get contraband in prison? How do you get it in? Did the prison system succeed in helping you change your ways? And finally, is it true that Baskin-Robbins always finds out? Wish you all the best with your days ahead. As long as there are prison guards, it will be easy to get contraband into prison. They've got the market on that sheet. The prison system is trash. It doesn't work. First rule of Baskin-Robbins is, never mind. Wrong joke. Thanks. How did you stay in the 9th grade for 3 years? I didn't do the work. So I didn't earn the credit. For all of my life prior to that, the school always passed me because they knew I was smart enough for the next grade even though I never did any work to prove it. But in high school, you actually have to earn it, which I didn't. How did you get into bank robbing? Mostly, it was just a matter of curiosity, and probably a good dose of being in poor mental health. Why did you turn yourself in? He mentioned it either earlier in this or another AMA. Became a father. Quit robbing. Wanted to do his time while his baby was a baby instead of him being caught and incarcerated down the road when baby grew up. Saved me some typing. Thanks. This is accurate. Why did you opt for bank robbery over just a bunch of smaller, easier robberies? To me, the bank robberies were smaller, easier robberies. What is the craziest thing about prison life that you haven't seen depicted in movies TV? There's really nobody to talk to when you have a bad day or get bad news. In prison, everyone is having the worst day of their life. Nobody gives a shit about yours. What was prison actually like? Is that where you got your tattoos? Nah. I got all my tattoos before prison. How did the romantic relationships go? Do you think it was hard to get to know new people if you go with your open face telling the truth from the beginning? Or in the opposite? You think that kind of bad guy is something women like about you? I'm unlikable for reasons far above the criminal history. Lol. Do you think in this day and age that someone could get away clean if they had to rob a bank? It's not impossible. But it's also one of the worst ways to make an easy buck. The risk reward is very much out of balance.